Hey everyone, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you. Now, I finally get to talk to you about 5000 series processors. Now, AMD have done something a little bit weird with this launch in that it sent 2 processors to each reviewer, but we've not all got the same ones. So today, I get to talk to you about the 5950X flagship and then the 5900X, which is probably going to be the one that the bulk of you are going to be looking at to gauge options on whether you need to be upgrading or not. On the day this video goes live, which is I can't remember the date, 5th of November. No, remember the 5th of November. So on that day, I get the other 2 processors. So I am going to be getting the 5800X and the 5600X, and then I will hoover that review round as quick as I can to get it uploaded for you, and I will give you that data later. So that's just so you know, but I think the flagships are a pretty good place to start. Obviously, the 5950X is the flagship, and that's going to be coming in at around $799, and then the 5900X is going to be coming in around the $549 mark, which is there or thereabouts the price of a 10900K. So it gives us a lot to talk about in today's review, and there is a lot of results because I have normal stock results for you, I have Precision Boost Overdrive results for you, and I have manual overclock results for you as well. But we do need to move on, but if you are interested in any of this, you can head over to the website, if you would like to go into it in any more depth there. But let's get cracking. Now, I know a lot of other reviewers are going to go into all the nitty-gritty about the architecture and all of that sort of stuff with you again, and to be fair, I just want to skim over the top with it. Clock speeds. The 16-core, the 5950X, up to 4.9 gigahertz, and then the 5900X up to 4.8 gigahertz. Now, I am going to talk to you all about the testing and the overclocking and everything I've done before I show you the results, because all of the results are in each of the graphs. I've not separated it out because obviously we need to be able to see how far they've moved on and stuff like that as well. But obviously the cheaper ones I am going to get to cover with you later on. Now, I did see when everyone was kind of talking about the new processors that 3800 megahertz was going to be the new sweet spot for these processors. And then also that 4000 megahertz was going to be easily possible. Now I can confirm 4000 megahertz will run with a simple DOCP switch. I have some 4000 megahertz G-Skill Trident Z, put it in, went into the BIOS, enabled DOCP, boom, it ran at 4000 megahertz. Now we also know that the sweet spot for memory is to have the F clock running at a 1-to-1. So if you've got 4000 megahertz memory, because of DDR, double data rate, technically it's running at 2000 megahertz. So what you would want if you had 4000 megahertz memory is your F clock to be running at 2000. If you had 3800 megahertz memory, you'd want your F clock to run at 1900. If you have 3600 megahertz memory, you want your F clock to be running at 1800. Now, this was where there started to be a problem in that I could not get my F clock to run at 1900 or 2000 to match the memory speed. Could easily get the memory speed running, but I couldn't get a 1-to-1 going on. So I did some tests, and you can see with the graph that pops up, this is the CPU latency with the memory speed with literally just DOCP turned on. Now, for 3600 megahertz, that was with an 1800 F clock for 1-to-1, but it was then left on auto to do what it wanted. I will say though that with 3600 megahertz, it actually did auto set the F clock to 1800 megahertz, so it went straight in on a 1-to-1. But you can see that effectively we end up with up to 10 nanoseconds extra latency because of the F clock not being in sync. So what I did with this data is then I went straight to AMD and I said, right, okay, so I can test it 4000, I can test it 3800, and I can test it 3600, but I can only get 3600 to run at a 1-to-1. And they did actually point me to a part in the reviewer's guide where they actually said they would prefer you to run with a 1-to-1 at 3600 anyway. And I said to them, I actually asked Why was there all this big hoo-ha about 3800 being the new sweet spot with 4000 megahertz possibilities? And effectively, what's going to happen this week, which is going to be great because it means I'm going to have to retest, but there is going to be an AGISA update, which is going to allow those of us lucky enough with the Silicon Lottery to be able to run a higher F-clock. So if your processor is capable of running the F-clock at 1900 or 2000 megahertz to tie into a 3800 or a 4000 megahertz memory, then that AGISA code should update it. So it's going to mean a BIOS update on your board, and then still not going to be guaranteed. You are going to have to do some testing, see if you can get it to run. I will look into this in more depth, but for all of my results, what I've done is followed AMD's advice and run 3600 megahertz memory with a one-to-one tie-in on the F-clock. And we will go and have a look to see if it makes any great differences when we can unlock this extra feature later on. So I've kind of dug into that for you, and it's a bit, I was a bit saddened, if I'm completely honest. One of the things I will say as well, so Precision Boost Overdrive, when you see the results in the graphs, effectively all I've done is gone and enabled Precision Boost Overdrive in the BIOS, and I've also added on the 200 megahertz offset. So effectively it just kind of kicks everything up a little bit, and then it does everything else for you. So it was two very simple changes, and that was it. With the manual overclock, that took a little bit of time, and I will be completely honest, when it came to a manual overclock, they both ended up running at 4.7 all core, and I did that with 1.3 volts. There was points where like I could easily boot them both at 4.8, but we were getting thermal issues and some of the benchmarks were starting to crash. So one of the things I will say is if you end up running 1.3 volts through one of these, which is manually set, the heat is ridiculous. And you will need, I've got H150i, which is a 360mm AIO, and I was running them with Noctua server spec fans at 3000 RPM. And we were still getting, as you'll see in a bit, up close to 90 degrees. But you do need to remember that I'm running all of the cores at that clock speed, and they're not moving around, and I've turned all the power saving stuff off. So effectively I am getting the best performance from them, but it's a very unfair test. Admittingly, I'll be completely honest, 4.7 gigahertz static speed would be like something I would probably want to be running on dedicated water. But the reason why I wanted to go into that info is because we need to show you the power draw, and you need all this information before you're going to be able to understand what all the bars mean in the graph. So I actually think, in all honesty, that the 5950X and the 5900X pulling just over 200 watts. Now that is a complete system wattage. That is what the power supply is drawing from the wall, which that in itself, when you think about this, is quite mad, especially when you see how far up the graph a 10900K is. It's pulling over 50% more power, which in itself is quite nuts when it wasn't that long ago that Intel was the one sipping at the power, and the AMD were getting slated for how badly power efficient they were. They've definitely come on in leaps and bounds in that over the last couple of generations, and it's a really nice thing to see. But the thing with the power is it's really, once you start to open the tap so that they can overclock, you can see that the 5950X goes from 200 watts up to 300 and nearly 370 watts. So when you do unlock those taps, it obviously, because of all the cores running so fast and every single one of them, that's the point when the power efficiency goes out the window. But the other thing to remember with that is that's 360 watts for a complete rig. So at that point, doing a CPU related bench, you could run that whole system off of a 500 watt power supply. Now I'm not telling you that you should, because it's going to depend on your GPU and everything, but it's just kind of to drive home that despite the fact that it looks like it's a lot higher up in the graph, it's actually still not pulling a great deal. Now temperatures, they did get hot, but the manual overclock one at the top, like I said, you need to remember that was literally on the bleeding edge, and it's not something I would expect you to be running at home, because it wasn't something that I could have lived with. But at the end of the day, it is just so that we can see the bleeding edge side of the performance. Pump was on maximum, the fans were on maximum, and we were still getting quite toasty temps. But it's most definitely not the hottest processor I've ever tested. The fact that we actually managed to get it to pass benches and stuff like this at all, with everything turned up to the hill, I actually think is pretty good. But at stock, not a problem at all. I had the AIO set to standard mode. So literally went into AI Suite, standard mode, and then we had 65 degrees and 68 degrees at stock, which is, for the most part, is what most people are going to run at home. And you'd easily be able to run one of these with a decent air cooler. The only reason for going for bigger AIOs is quite literally the fact that you can have the fan speeds down so low. Manual overclocking and precision boost overdrive, you are going to need to invest in something fairly hefty. But I think with the price of these processors, if you do buy them anyway, it's not going to be going into a super budget system, and a decent cooler should be on the top of your list, especially where these do respond quite well to lower temperatures in relation to the way that the boost and the cores kind of goes. Now, we're quite thickly on now into the actual performance side of things. So I've told you, precision boost overdrive, 200 megahertz boost. With the manual, we were looking at 4.7. And all cores loaded, it was still, well, you're going to see with this, the numbers that they've chucked out is actually kind of crazy. Obviously, I did keep them nice and cool. The room was always somewhere between 20 and 21 degrees, so normal kind of heating kind of things. Sorry for those of you in a hot country, but if you're in a hot country, you're going to have a better cooler anyway. So, the long and short of it is, now, this graph, yes, they are at the top, but the only things that would have been above this in reality are things like Threadrippers and Xeons with gazillions of cores and costing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times as much. So I've kind of thinned it out. I think the fact that you can see I've left the 10980XE in there, which is 1,200 quid or 1,100 pounds, sorry, now kind of gives you a good bit of balance, and I don't think the processors that I've tested in the past that would have been above this really belong there. But nearly 12,000 points for the 5950X with that manual overclock. Okay, that's pretty cool, but straight out the box we were scoring 9,800. So you can see easily there that even the 5900X is above the 10900XE at stock. The other thing to remember with the 10900XE is there's 18 cores in that processor, and as I did say, it's £1,100. I'm not even sure whether 10900 kind of sits in the graph. Oh, it's right in the middle at 6,337. Now this is all core, so you do need to remember that the more cores you throw at it, the better it's going to perform. So it really does favour the AMDs. And you do need to remember that this one's 12 cores, this one's 16 cores, and the 10900K is only 10. But the 10900K is the same price as this one, so it is kind of fair. Blender, again, a big munchy benchmark with this one. This is one of our own custom ones with 4 million polygons. It's a bit of an insane bench, and the numbers relate to the graph to how long it actually takes. So if you see with some of them, like the 10600K, for example, takes 35 minutes there or thereabouts to do the render in 4K mode. But you can see at the top, the Intels with the overclock were just favoured over the 5900X. But the difference between the 5900X out the box, 5950, sorry, out the box with 15 minutes, and then it took pretty much a minute and a half off, sorry, for a precision boost overdrive. So I'm starting to think that precision boost overdrive with maybe some other tiny tweaks and maybe that memory being dialed up, it could be a really good place for those of you out there that are looking to have a rig like this built and it be a mixture of a gaming rig and then a professional use rig. For those of you that are doing video editing, 3D stuff or anything like that, Me personally, I do a lot of Sony Vegas rendering because of how I make my videos for you to put up on YouTube. So this is the graph that I actually wanted to see. And sadly, the 5950X, even with a massive overclock on it, was still trumped by the 10900 XE, and it was a minute. But in reality, the extra cores, the clock speed was the same as well. It was 4.7 on that throughout. So that was a number that I thought maybe we could look into a little bit more later on. Could maybe work around it with the memory optimizations and that sort of thing. But the bulk of them, when you have a look at the thick end of the graph, are actually fairly close. So the pricing and everything really does kind of start to drive home there as well. So the bit that you've all kind of wanted to see is gaming. Now, we've got this single graph, which is everything's in there, and that's really kind of, there's a lot of data for you to be able to look at. Now, we know that where we do an awful lot of testing for you, it gets kind of complicated when I'm trying to show you a lot of stuff in a single graph. Now, these, with the gaming, we went back and we retested all of this just so that we could have minimums, because when we've done it in the past, it wasn't something that we were plotting and we haven't kept the screenshots. So we've gone back and these have all been retested this week. So that's why the graph isn't that big, amazingly. But what we've also done is separated them out into specific games now. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider, for example, you can see at the top of the graph is the 10900K, but it's very close to the 5900X. Actually, the fact that the 5900X with Precision Boost Overdrive just about trumped the 5950X. So that's something for you to kind of digest, is that some of you aren't going to know which way that you possibly want to swing for the processor, and obviously the 5950X is a fair bit more, but the 5900X Precision Boost Overdrive, really, really simple thing to do. You're going to get similar kind of gaming performance. And that was something that kind of carried on throughout. Far Cry 5 was pretty much the same. And so you've got 10900K, then 5900X with Precision Boost Overdrive, then the 5950X, and it kind of sorts itself out. But the one that I was actually kind of interested in more than any, because of the fact it is so very, very CPU limited, is Total Warhammer. Now, if you look at the very, very top of this graph, there is not a great deal into it. And the numbers that we want to be paying attention to are the minimums, because the minimum frame rate is the be-all and end-all when we're talking about 1080p, because these were all done in 1080p, and that is because 1080p would be CPU limited. So this is the graph that, or all of the games, sorry, they would be CPU limited, and it would have been the place that AMD would have fallen over horrendously in the past. And you can see there's literally a frame or two in it, which isn't a huge amount. Now, they did say in all of the press stuff that they did that some of the games were above and some of the games were below. We've not done a full bench suite, and yeah, we did see the 10900 was slightly in front, but for a frame or two's difference, but then with everything else that it was doing was going to be in front and by a huge magnitude. I think we've gone from AMD only having their party trick being cores to technically now they've dragged it all right back, and they are a genuine contender. Now, I know people are going to say, oh, you've only chosen those games because they were behind. When it's not, you can see we've got a consistent history with these games that we've used in the past. Total Warhammer we've been using for ages, Far Cry 5 we've been using for ages. We did add Civilization, whatever it's called, Fred Meyer's Civilization to it as well for the AI turn speed, and that was very similar kind of results as well. And you can go and see these all on the Overclock 3D website. Now, the weird thing is we are testing our graphics cards with AMD, and we have been for a little while. So we do have options, but the reason why we've held back is because in reality, we've got graphics cards coming at the end of the month as well, where the 5000 series could actually end up playing a good role in driving the performance of those graphics cards even further forward, and the graphics cards actually being able to make a positive impact on the overall system speeds as well, because of the GDDR6 memory optimizations where it becomes part of the system memory and all stuff like that. So there is an awful lot of testing to come in not enough time. But my point is, we've done this bit, and the fact that they've pulled up their socks so much, and they are there or there for a frame or two's difference, I don't think that's, you know, an awful lot at all. We're not talking about like 10 frames now, where it's just that they are there. So my point is, we were expecting some of them to be a little bit quicker, but we'd have to test more games to be able to find that. And obviously I've only done a few because we've concentrated on actual system and CPU kind of stuff rather than just gaming, because just gaming is a graphics card review. But now, some of you are going to be wondering why we've only used the 2080 Ti, and the reason why we've only used the 2080 Ti is because in reality we've tested all of the other processors that are in the graphs with this graphics card. So if we were to go back and put a 3080 in there, then I would be testing for like an awful long time, because I'd have to retest every single thing. But then the other side of it is, what's the point in me putting a 3080 in there when in a month's time you're all going to be asking me why I haven't put a 6000 series graphics card in there, and I'd have to do it again. And it would take me 2 or 3 weeks to just get through all of the testing that's required, so I didn't see the point. That may come later. So yes, the point is with these, they overclocked really well. Sadly not to the levels that the 3000 series did, because with the 3000 series we overclocked them to the point so it was almost the all core was matching the boost. Sadly these didn't go that way, so they've gone back to the way that the 1000 series and the 2000 series did, in that they're just a little bit slower than the max core. We might be able to unlock more. Maybe the Agisa will help with overclocking. I don't particularly know, but one of the things I did know that with the manual all core, we were getting to the limits of the cooling itself. It would be something that I would look into long term, of maybe like 2 or 3 cores, maybe 4 cores running at 4.7, 4.8. But the problem is we can't do manual like specific core overclocking. Now that's something that might have helped, but obviously you can change the turbo level, so we will have to play with that more going forward. It's just not something we've had enough time to investigate enough. And like I said, the other side of it, where I know there's a Agisa updates coming, I didn't see the point in doing too much of it when I know that I'm going to have to retest it all and play with it all again anyway. Anyway, right, so the 5900X, definitely at the moment, from what I've seen, this is the one that I would say the bulk of you are going to be wanting to spend your money on. Turn the precision boost overdrive onto it with that 200 megahertz boost, and you're going to be getting the same sort of gaming performance as you would with that one. This one's going to be great for most users, most streamers, most average people. This one, yes, it does come with an extra price, but if you're going to be spending some of your time doing 3D rendering, lots of video editing, 3D modeling, CAD stuff, then the extra cores on this will serve you well. I will also say that the Precision Boost Overdrive is a very good way to go with this one. But if you are an all-core person, then the all-core overclock will serve you guys better than it will you guys if you're gaming focused. So if you are like hardcore user, then getting this up to 4.6 gigahertz maybe will literally make it insane, because normally you're going to be running around the 4 mark, maybe 4.2 if you're lucky. So those extra few megahertz on all of the cores will make this an absolute barnstormer for you. I personally found a limit at about 1.3 volts, but that was with horrendous cooling as well. So you might need to play around with it. It is something that you're going to need to start low and then turn things up. Run a benchmark each time, like Cinebench or something like that. So as you're going to get numbers as it starts to increase, and you can also then run your benchmarks each time to see how hot it's getting and tailor it to your system and your cooling. Deep breaths. I know that this has been an awful lot of me talking, but in reality, there's so much about these that you do need to know the nitty details, and I am known for my long, exhaustive reviews full of information. This one, I would actually say, is kind of the all-round kind of one. This one, for me personally, is the OC 3D kind of like performance award, because there's a lot more grunt there, and this one would get the enthusiast award, because that's the enthusiast one that we're going to buy, and this one's more for those of you out there that are going to need the grunt and are going to be using it for more than just gaming. Although you'd think that the extra clock speed would have made a bigger difference, but I showed you that with this one, for gaming alone, this one's the choice. Right. I've got a dry mouth. I literally need a drink. And just so that you're aware of the time, it's 9 o'clock in the evening, the day before NDA, and I've still not edited or rendered or done anything with this yet. So we are down to the wire. I literally finished my testing about 2 hours ago. So I hope you enjoyed the review. I know we have had an awful lot of chatting, and I know I'm going round in circles now, so I just need to say I'm going to love you and leave you. This has been Tiny Tom Logan with another video for you out. Ding! Love you, sis.